Welcome, Dr. Tom Cowan, to the Hydration Foundation Dr. Talk series. We're really pleased and delighted to have you speak about hydration, especially you, because you have such a unique take on hydration, its place, its role in our health and lives. Would you mind just, and again, the purpose of this interview is to help other physicians really learn new things about hydration, increase our understanding, help us bring better information into clinics, into hospitals, into doctors' offices, so they can really see the importance and value of hydration. So will you share with us a little bit about your expertise, your credentials, your current work, however you'd like to share how you got to be where you are. And thank you so much for this interview. We are really, really excited.
Okay, thank you for having me. My credential, or how I got here, was basically I grew up thinking, or everybody else thinking, I should be a doctor, and I hated the idea. So I tried to figure out anything else I could do but be a doctor. I went to university and didn't like that. And so I got out, joined the Peace Corps to see if I could try to figure out how to be a gardener, which seemed more useful than being a doctor. And I loved gardening, but I didn't really see a way forward. But luckily, when I was in the Peace Corps, I ran into the work of Rudolf Steiner and Weston Price while living in a hut in Swaziland. And that convinced me that the doctoring that I didn't want to do was not the only way that doctoring could be done. And so that was kind of a revelation turning point for me. So then I went to medical school, did internship, and started studying anthroposophical medicine at the time. This was in the early 80s. And pretty much in 1984-ish, 1985, set up a practice and have been doing more or less the same thing ever since. It's, of course, changed through the years. Hopefully I know more than I did then. I helped start the Weston Price Foundation with Sally Fallon. I was part of the Physicians for Anthroposophical Medicine for a while, but now I'm not really part of that. And I've just tried to figure out, how to do medicine and how to do life ever since. I don't particularly have any other credentials. Like I'm self-taught, I would say.
We call it self-discovery. I mean, the truth is there for us to find when we become seekers. Yeah.
I don't trust much institutional learning anyways, frankly. So that's how I did it. I don't know if it's always the best way, but it's certainly the only way for me.
And it's a way. It's a way. And what we're doing here is trying to share ways, many ways, to understand how we got to where we are and why hydration has become an issue. I know I have a list of questions. They're really important, carefully constructed. So I'm going to be reading them to you, but that's okay. We're still in a live conversation. But I know that in your just out book, Vaccine Autoimmunity and the Changing Nature of Childhood Illnesses, you devote a great deal of your writing to structured or gel water or hydration. And in fact, many are not aware that the water inside the cell is not H2O. In all our cells, 100% of the water in the cell is in this gel phase, fourth phase, easy water, liquid crystalline water. We have a lot of structured water. We have a lot of names. We haven't settled on a name yet because this is all really coming into focus now, that there's actually different kinds of water in the body. Extraordinary information. Can you help us shape our understanding, both structurally and energetically, about what this water is?
Okay. So often jokingly say that the reason I wrote the vaccine autoimmune book, it was the second of what's now become a 3-part series. The third part is coming out soon, and that's essentially all about water. So the first one was about...
Welcome. I can't wait for the book.
Yeah, the first one was about the heart and why the blood moves, or how the blood moves. The second one was about autoimmunity and vaccines. But the real issue that got me started was ever since I was a child, which comes under the category of the things that there's a difference between observation, like things one can experience, versus what we're told is true, or at least what's focused on. So, for instance, I noticed ever since I was a child that when I got sick, it had a very specific sequence of events, which was I was fine, and then I got a fever and felt sick and achy and all that, and then I got snot, and then I got better. And it never went the other way around. And I wondered about that. Why is that the case? It happened the same way every single time now for 55 years or that I remember. And nobody ever said anything about that in medical school or medical training. Nobody seemed to care. And so essentially I was left on my own to try to sort that out. So that was sort of the question that led me to that. And if you end up answering that question, the whole panorama of water and, structured water actually comes into focus. The other question I would say I have tried to answer for 40-ish years is the question that could be encapsulated, what is life? And what I mean by that is the central tenet of conventional medicine and science is that the only thing that exists in the world is substance. Like, that's like considered axiomatic. In other words, we all believe that, or if you don't, you're a crazy person. Now, it's true that some people believe in, quote, God or something, but that's different. That's like out there somewhere, or in heaven, or has nothing to do with my foot, or how a frog works or anything. So there's only substance. That's what medicine is based on. So I tried to essentially examine that. And for instance, what I found was, it's not like God said that's the case. Actually, the guy who said that was the case was actually Rene Descartes. Nobody believed that before that. Nobody. No traditional person, no indigenous person, not Isaac Newton or Galileo or Shakespeare or Alexander the Great or Socrates or Plato. Nobody believed that until Descartes. And he said, okay, so the only thing that exists is substance and mechanics, and that's how from now on we have to study the human being, which means that we don't have any conception of the difference between life and non-life. Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, how does this have to do with water and hydration? And the way that I would explain that is to ask somebody to imagine a carrot. And then imagine, okay, the carrot is, like we're told, is made out of only substance. So if you took all the atoms, which is what we think substance is made out of, so 46 trillion hydrogens and 6,000 nitrogens and sulfurs and all that, and you go to a chemical store and say, I want a bag of all those elements, and they give you a bag and they mix them all together, and you put it on the table, and it's a little heap of stuff. And the question is that a carrot? I ask a lot of people that, and I ask a lot of patients that. And as far as I've heard, nobody thinks that's a carrot. It's just a pile of stuff. And so the question then, if that's clearly not a carrot, what's missing from the carrot. And so whenever I ask people to think about this, I ask them to think about it as if they were a 7-year-old or maybe a 5-year-old. Because you could say, well, the carrot has blah, 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 sulfur hydrogenated bonds of 64 degrees, and the heap of stuff doesn't have that. Right, except that may be true, but that's not what a 7-year-old would say. They would say, that pile there, that doesn't look like a carrot. Why not? It doesn't have the right shape or form of a carrot. It doesn't smell like a carrot. It doesn't taste like a carrot. It's not a carrot. I know it's not a carrot. There's nothing you could say that would convince me that that's a carrot. And then, so the question is, what's missing? What's missing is the form. And the fact that this stuff is not living, whereas a carrot is, and a whole lot of things that come out of that. So you can then picture why Steiner called this living principle, he called it the etheric body, but he called it also the form body. So in a sense, a carrot is stuff plus form. Now, the reason that's relevant to us is, can we stop 1 second here?
Yeah.
Linda?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just keep hearing my wife banging around in the kitchen. So.
Yeah. Tom, I love where you're going.
Okay.
Appreciate it. You know, I'm an anthropologist, so
right.
The question of what else besides the material reality has been so drummed out of our culture.
Yes.
And there we are. I like to say this as an ethnographer. We are the only culture, the moderns, who have ever come to the conclusion that material reality is completely holds all of us.
Yes.
All the explanation.
Right. And it's such a myth. There's no evidence to support it.
There's no other culture in history has ever, or even I don't know, no other culture in history has ever really lived the life that we have lived, stripped of all other skills and resources.
Can you speak up a little bit, because I'm having or I don't know if I can turn the volume up or something.
Yeah, I said no other culture has ever lived without stripped in the way we are of other skills and accesses to other ways of thinking and being beyond the material, and we've been reduced to materialists. And this is the great problem in trying to address what health is.
Right.
Or even what water is.
It's right. It's a problem of water. So should I go back to?
I'd love that.
So basically, what's missing is the form, and it's pretty easy to see. So the other word that Steiner used for it was a form body, or the formative force. It's also the force. It's the principle that makes stuff into life.
I love that.
And so without that form principle, that life body, or etheric body, he called it, there is no life. And here's where it becomes relevant to us. The form body only can work through water. So in other words, the definition of a plant or any living thing is stuff plus water creates form equals life. Now, there was a very famous physicist named Erwin Schrödinger who actually wrote a book called What is Life? And he said that all non-life is subject to two basic forces, entropy and gravity. So if I take this book, and drop it, it will fall down. And if you leave it there 1,000 years, it will turn into dust. But not so with living things. Living things go up like a tree or like a child, and they make increasing complex forms and not subject to entropy. So those laws don't apply to living things. Yet we have a science that studies living things according to those laws, which is basically, it's lunacy. I mean, there's no empirical evidence that that is actually true. That's just what we believe. Why do we believe it? Best I can tell, because A, Descartes said it, and he was kind of a lunatic himself, and B, people make a lot of money off that. And they do a lot of interesting things as a result of that, like make stuff at the expense of the life of people and the planet. So the more people have gone down that road, the more stuff we make and the less life we have. And so now we get to a situation where we're, like almost extinct. Why? Because we don't either believe in, understand, or even attempt to study life. So that was part of my background. And the other part was, getting more to the issues that you're talking about with hydration and water. I was taught in medical school that the basic fundamental unit of biology is a cell, which I can buy that to a certain extent. And the cell is a membrane-bound sack of water with stuff floating in it. And so nobody ever said there's 3 phases of water or 4. They just said, there's basically 3 phases of matter: ice, water, steam. And so the question then is, what phase of water is the stuff in our cells?
Yes.
It's not ice, and it can't be steam. So everybody said, well, it's liquid water. I mean, I didn't know to ask that question then, but that was implied. We're basically a membrane-bound bag of liquid with stuff floating in it. So then I was an ER doctor for 10 years, part-time, and I saw people shot and bludgeoned and stabbed and all kinds of things. And I never once saw anybody with a puddle of water next to their bed. Which I must admit, I asked myself, because I knew it by then not to ask anybody else, so where's all the water? I mean, there's blood, but that's different. That's not inside the cell. There supposedly is all this water. 70% of the contents inside the cell you can prove is water, or at least sort of like water. And yet there was no water squirting out of this person on the bed. So I basically didn't believe the whole thing. That's not how it works. And so that led me into the sort of dual investigation of trying to, quote, prove the etheric body or prove this life force, and studying, what's the deal with water? Because it's obviously not like we were told. And one of the points I want to make here is there's so many things in our world which we believe and we're told to believe and everybody believes. And if you just sort of look at it, it's just not true. It's just, I don't know who made that up, but it's not true. And then it becomes this kind of concept of cognitive dissonance. So everybody believes there's only 3 phases of matter. And then you look at Jell-O and you say, which one is that?
Yeah.
Well, it's not ice and it's not water and it's definitely not steam. So that what I learned in 3rd grade, which is the foundation of material life on Earth, is nonsense. And all you have to do is make Jell-O and find out.
Well, you speak of charge in the cell. And you speak of charge in the cell as in a fascinating way that I hadn't yet come across in my own research on water. You speak about the charge in the cell as a way to space cells appropriately from each other. I thought that was absolutely key and very new way to help us visualize, think, and organize our own thinking around water. And you say, as sort of a counterpoint, that uncharged cells clump together and are tumor forming. So I wanted to ask, what function does this jello-like water have in maintaining this correct charge in cells?
Right. So that gets into one of the fundamental aspects of my work, because essentially so if you go back into history, one of the most pressing biological questions was, how come cells, mammalian cells, live in a high sodium rich environment and yet have a low sodium environment inside the cell? On the other hand, they live in a potassium poor environment outside of the cell, yet they have a potassium rich interior of the cell. And that goes for all cells. And that's one of the fundamental sort of paradoxes of cellular theory and animal existence. How does that happen? Because the cell membrane is permeable to sodium and potassium. So if you can imagine, if you put a balloon with distilled water in a vat of salt water, and the skin of the balloon was, the sodium and potassium could freely travel in and out, within a very short time, like minutes, it would equilibrate, and the sodium and potassium would be the same inside the balloon and outside the balloon. And that's, quote, what should happen with a human cell. The sodium and potassium should equilibrate, and it should be the same inside and outside. Yet we've known for hundreds of years that's not the case. The sodium is low in the inside and high on the outside. And the fact that that happens creates a charge around the cell and creates a charge through the cell membrane, which allows the cell to do work. So essentially, everything is dependent on the cell being charged, including, as you said, if there's the reason a liver has the form that it does is because the liver cells have a charge, and when two negatively charged liver cells come together, they keep their distance appropriate for a liver cell, which is different than an eye cell or a foot cell. And that's how the form of the liver is created. If you lose the charge, it's like a dead battery. And so then there's no charge on the outside, and the cells clump together. They become too dense because there's no negative repulsion to keep them apart. And that's what we call a tumor. So fundamental to understanding the whole cancer process is, why does a cell lose its charge? Well, there's been centuries of research into how this sodium-potassium distribution happens, and I don't know how many Nobel Prizes awarded. They figured it out. There's a sodium-potassium pump embedded in the membrane, and they have pictures of it, and you can know all the protein subtypes, and all this has been figured out. And so you can clearly see that the reason why the sodium potassium has the distribution that it does, low sodium in the inside, high on the outside, is because there's a pump in the membrane. It looks like a merry-go-round. It binds sodium in the inside, potassium on the outside, then it circles around, dumps the potassium on the inside, and dumps the sodium on the outside. That creates the separation of charges, which creates voltage across the cell wall, which creates the distribution of the cells and allows the cell to do work. Great. We figured that out. We have drugs that affect the sodium-potassium pump. The whole thing is brilliant. And then a guy named Gilbert Link comes along, and he did something very interesting. He isolated the pump and figured out how much energy it would take to run the pump to create this distribution. And what he figured out, apparently for the first time, and it's about a 200-page proof, so it's long and tedious, I must admit, but he figured out that it would take about 300 times the amount of energy available to the cell in total to run this pump. In other words, it's like you have a mortgage of $9,000 a month for your house and your salary is $2,000. Eventually, A, you're going to lose the house, and B, you're not going to have enough money to do anything else, like eat. And it's simply, the math doesn't add up. I like to say there is no pump. The pump is a myth. It's nonsense. There is a pump, but it's like a backup system, which rarely gets used. And the other interesting thing about this is you can take this cell and you can poke a number of holes in it, like hundreds, and it still maintains the same charge and the same sodium-potassium distribution, which essentially means you can get rid of the cell membrane where the pump is supposedly residing, and it doesn't affect the distribution of sodium and potassium. So the whole thing is basically a myth. So then he had to answer the question then, well, so how does this distribution come about if it's not this mythical pump? And here the answer essentially tells the whole story. He said, the water in the cell is not water. It's a very specific gel form, which has specific bond angles, which creates a kind of framework or mesh inside the cell. And again, I like to talk in analogies here. It's like a mosquito netting. There's a little bit of a difference here. But so the size of the mosquito netting is so organized so you keep the mosquitoes out and let the air in. And if it's too small, the mesh, the air doesn't get in, and that doesn't work. And if the mesh is too big, then the mosquitoes get in and it doesn't work. By some quirk of nature, supposedly, or God, or however one wants to think of this etheric force, the mesh of a gel is the perfect size to, by itself, hang on to potassium and exclude sodium. So there's no energy needed to do this sodium-potassium distribution. It's simply, that's how life happened in animal systems, in animal cells. The mesh had to be a certain size, and only structured or gel phase water has that size, which by itself attaches to potassium and excludes sodium. And so that's the answer. Mm-hmm. The next question is, how does this gel form? And then you get into something else, because I have a slightly Yiddish background. It's called a bubbemeise, which means an old wives' tale. So how does this gel happen in the cell? Exactly the same way you make Jell-O. You make Jell-O by, you put proteins in water. Except then nothing happens. So you have to add energy, and that's called heat. So you heat it up. What happens is the gelatin proteins unfold. They go from this to this. That allows them to interact with the water, and then when you cool it down, it forms gels. So that's how you form Jell-O. So how does the gel form in a human cell? So you take proteins, and you then add an energy source. Now, you can't put a human being over a Bunsen burner, or at least I don't think that would work. So you need a non-heat energy source. And that energy source is ATP. Now, some people think ATP is the energy molecule of a biological system, and that's a myth. It's not. I know that.
I know you understand ATP differently than what I've heard in the past, so I'm anxious to hear how your take is a bit different.
Right. ATP is considered the energy molecule of biological systems, and everybody these days is all about ATP and mitochondria and all that. Now, I'm not saying that ATP isn't important, because I'll tell you why it is important in a second, but it isn't an energy molecule. There's no more energy in an ATP than there is in any other normal molecule. How do I know that? Because Ling proved it without a shadow of a doubt, and anybody who wants to know it, just read the works of Gilbert Ling. So there's no energy in it, but what it does is it binds to the proteins that make up the skeleton of the cell, and it unfolds them, similar to how heat works in Jello. It unfolds the proteins interact with the water, and that forms the gel. The gel then excludes the sodium and binds to potassium. That charges the cell. That creates the form of the interaction of the cells versus other cells, creating the form of the organs and tissues, and that's how life works. It's a charged cell. So the ATP is necessary because if you don't have ATP, you can't unfold the proteins, and therefore you won't form a gel. Now, this gel does basically everything that we do as a cellular organism. So for instance, the reason why it's water is because, or a crystalline gel, is because it has infinite binding sites. So if you take estrogen, there's a certain site on the water that it can bind to, and that creates a change in the gel, which then is communicated and tells the DNA, for example, which also has its own crystalline water. It tells the DNA to make breast tissue, for instance. So that's how you go from hormonal signal. The gel is the interactive phase, the communicative phase, and then it creates an action by making a protein. It even binds to thoughts and feelings and hormones and vitamins and antioxidants. Everything binds to the water, creates a change in the gel. You can demonstrate this with, analysis machines. And that creates actionable changes in the cell, which is what we call life. So it all goes through that. Now, why do we get fever, snot, get better theory essentially is the definition of health is you have perfect intracellular crystalline gels, like a radio. It's interesting if you give a radio to a person in 1400, I think they would hear the radio, right? Somebody talking in the radio, and they would open the radio to see where the little person is. Except there is no little person in the radio. The radio is a receiver, and as long as it's in tune, it will accept these invisible whatever waves and turn that into perceptible sound. And that's the same thing with the crystalline gels in our cells. Their configuration, which is both universal and then somewhat unique to that person, they're tuned to accept influences from the outside. When they do that, they translate that, unlike a radio translates it into sound, our gels translate that into action, usually proteins or other movement or something. But if you change the dial on the radio and make it out of tune, the whole thing doesn't work. And that's what happens in our cells. Mm-hmm. If you dissolve stuff in the gels, like arsenic or aluminum or something, you have an out of tune gel which is not receptive, and then the whole thing falls apart. So the only way you can get that out and reconstitute a gel is to heat it up like Jello. That makes, if you had a poison grape in a bowl of Jello, and you say, I want to get that grape out of there, you could take a big scooper and get it out, and you'd probably ruin the whole thing. Or you could dissolve it with heat, and then the Jello would flow, it would liquefy, and then the poison grape would flow out, and you could get it out, and then you could reconstitute the gel. That's what happens with us. you put aluminum in the gel, that body says this is not right. So it dissolves the gel, that's called fever. It makes it flow. The aluminum gets flushed out in the mucus, and then it reconstitutes the gel. That's how our bodies detoxify.
That is a very extraordinary set of steps and thinking around water. We know water is the universal solvent.
Right.
We just, until you offered this sort of visual picture, this explanation, we haven't really thought about how water does that purifying work, and even why, or why water would want to find a state to purify itself or create this dynamic living motion between incoming and exuding contaminants or waste. However we talk, both of those, we have natural waste that we need to get rid of, and then we have this very contaminated modern environment that we live in. And I love this idea of the relationship of heat to the form of water, and how then that becomes a universal solvent, almost through a mechanical process of, I don't want to quite call it mechanical, what I really want to call it is electrical.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I often ask myself and patients and other people the question, what would you do if you were this body? The point of it is to have a perfect gel. If somebody puts something wonky in your gel, what would you do to get it out? Well, I would dissolve it by using heat so it would flow, and then I would reconstitute it. And that's exactly what happens. And that's the only way it can happen.
So now you're identifying in a very specific way how hydration is necessary for both biological function, communication, and information sharing, and a secondary process of size contamination through moving things out of the gel matrix by eliminating the matrix, letting it flow as a more liquid form, and then reconstituting itself without the, let's call it the poison grape, right?
Right.
So you're identifying a value to water. Most people think hydration, the purpose of hydration is to keep us moist. This is wet. That's the purpose of water. What you're talking about is such a sophisticated understanding of what hydration accomplishes in our 99% molecule by count water body that we have. We are bodies of water. It's fascinating. So I just want to really nail for our listeners and other people who are trying to understand what water is, that it doesn't just have a wet function. It does have a wet function. It has multiple functions that we're not paying attention to. It has this profound universal solvent quality to help us in a very challenging environment. And it also has an informational structure. So those are new ways to think about water that are quite important for the modern life that we're living, which is challenged with vast amounts of information coming in to our physical bodies and vast amounts of contaminants coming in. So now the role of hydration becomes so prevalent, so prominent in how we're going to get our self protected and in health in this kind of environment.
Yeah.
Did I get it?
Is
there more? Tell me.
I mean, my take on it is it can be possibly explained in a simpler way.
Please
that
do.
Maybe helps people understand. I don't know, there's so many things. So I would substitute the word hydration for gel formation. So if you take, so what's the problem with arthritis? So you have bone on bone, and the bones are wearing each other away, and then they hurt. So why does that happen? Well, the normal situation is they're supposed to be covered with gels, which all gels are negatively charged, so that when the two bones come together, the negative charges repel each other, and that allows them to move smoothly over each other, which is why you don't have pain in your knee. If you lose that gel, then they stick together because there's no negative charge, and then they wear each other away, and now you've got osteoarthritis, and somebody says, I don't know why you have osteoarthritis, let's put a new knee in. And you can see that with sinusitis. You can see it with the flow of the water. I wrote a whole book about the flow of water in our blood vessels is a result of this negative charge, this electrical charge. So you can see this all over the place. And then so the question I ask is, what encourages the formation of these gels? And then what inhibits the formation of the gels? And it's very simple, because Pollack did this experiment where you basically put a beaker of water and then you hang a hydrophilic tube in the water, and the water and the hydrophilic tube interact and form a negative gel layer lining the tube, which puts positive charges in the water, which then repel and start it flowing. So all you need to form flow is a tube and water. Now, if you put the tube in a lead box, it stops flowing. If you shine a sunlight on the tube, it starts flowing. If you put the beaker on the earth, it starts flowing. If you put your hands on the beaker, it starts flowing. If you put your dog next to the beaker, it starts flowing. All those things are ambient sources of energy which structure the water, create gels, and start flow, and start energetically charging the human being. If you put your cell phone next to the beaker, the flow stops. Why? Because non-native electromagnetic fields deteriorate the formation of gels. If the formation of gels is what gives you life, which is what I just said, then it's not a stretch to think that cell phone will kill you. Mm-hmm. Not today, but eventually it will. Or all these non-native electromagnetic fields. If you put arsenic in the water, it stops flowing because it inhibits the formation of gels. That's how arsenic causes disease and kills people. So you can start to develop a living biology and see if the unifying principle is the gels. And you call it hydration, which I'd say is similar, but I think of hydration, to me, the problem I have with that, I guess, is if it's water, it's still hydration. Mm-hmm. If you change the gel phase inside the cell to a water phase, technically speaking, you could say it's still hydrated, but it doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. And so that's the key. It's not the presence of water, it's the state of water.
Yes. Yes.
And so that,
amen.
Yeah. So you could have, wonky stuff dissolved in the water. Mm-hmm. You could have too much deuterium in the water. There's a whole lot of ways of creating, of converting gel structured water into dysfunctional water. The problem is we have no understanding of that. We're not even interested, basically, and it's because it gets you into the meaning or the definition or in the investigation of life itself, which is basically a structured water phenomena. And we have no tolerance for that.
Well, we have a growing body of thinkers who are helping bring this into focus. I would love to hear you speak. I know you are well acquainted with Dr. Pollack's work. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about Mae Wan Ho. I think her research is very important. I love to hear people. I know you've read her work. I'd love to hear what you think.
I don't think I can, I don't think I know specifically what she thinks differently than what other people think.
Okay.
I don't think I can say anything about that. I mean, I have read her work. It's been a while, but I don't have I don't want to not be correct about what she said versus maybe what somebody else said, and I may get it wrong, and I don't know the answer to that.
That's okay. That's fine. Is there someone else's work that has helped besides Gilbert Ling and Dr. Pollack? Who else have you gone to think about water, to think about a new way to think about water? How is it? Where have you been shaped in your own thinking?
I mean, it's Steiner's etheric body.
Okay.
And the, you know, for years I've seen my job is to essentially translate this very esoteric and dense, and the language is just not accessible to most people, and to translate it into a way that, you know, people, including myself, can actually see and work with it and make it therapeutically relevant. Because if somebody's not forming gels properly and has pain in their knee, you know, you might want to have them go out in the sun or put their feet on the earth or drink cleaner water or take proteins that increase structuring of the water. So it's a very practical field. It's not, you know, I mean, it has its esoteric quality, but it's it basically is how I do medicine in a sense.
So is that your list for forming gel water, sunlight,
earth, human touch, your dog, walking, drink, you know, eat bone broth, which has the proteins that structure the water. Throw your cell phone off the nearest bridge and get rid of as many electromagnetic fields as possible, and all sort of, you know, negative, toxic influences from emotions to, you know, glyphosate, you name it, all these things. Vaccines are a huge destroyer of the gel phase. So there's a lot to do. It's basically modern life. Modern life destroys your gels. Traditional things, being out in the sun, laughing with friends, that's what creates gels. Pure food, all that stuff. It's not complicated, but it seems to be difficult for us to, like we say, well, I like my cell phone, right? So do I, but it's killing you.
There's a challenge to modern life here that we need to address and think about and find ways. One of the reasons why we use the portal of hydration to have these conversations is that's a word people understand.
Right.
They want to start the conversation on. They know they need hydration. They know
right.
We live in supremely dehydrating environments. I mean, literally, we're surrounded by drywall.
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke. I like to say from my research on desert people that we now live we all are living in deserts.
Yeah.
We closed the door and we're inside there now. So,
I mean, that's a good point. And I appreciate that use of the word as a conduit into the bigger concepts. So yes, I like that.
Yeah. And the fact that water is a spectrum that slides through its own qualities, that fourth phase being this capacity for water to decontent, enhance its capacity to communicate, you know, to run a high functioning information system, which was mostly what May Wan Ho's work was about. Fasting, that liquid crystalline structure literally becomes like radio towers that can, you know, beautifully send efficient signals. That is all dependent on this gel state of water.
Yes, absolutely.
Really exciting information to bring into our very desperate modern world.
Right.
We want to help heal each other. We don't want to just go away and live on an island by ourselves. I mean, we're here as healers.
I thought of that.
Yeah, I've thought of it too. So there's days I'm like, I'm done. Guys, go take care of this. And I'm just going to go have my own fun life. And I know how to do it because I've, been in many indigenous cultures, but that's not there's a.
Well, if May Wan Ho is the one I got that from, then that's where I got it from.
I love it. I revere her work, and I think to help people, why I'm asking you about who your mentors are, who you know, because what I'm trying to do is help people understand there's a whole network of people who've been working on this for a long time.
Yeah.
And now the ability to sort of pull together their work and show there's a phase of water we haven't paid attention to that is foundational. We are made of this stuff. The fact that most physicians do not know that it's not H2O in your body is an extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
How did we get here? That is insane.
Right.
And so how do we share? And again, then we have to use the Greeks to the Greek. Our modern language is science. So we can know these things in a way that doesn't need science. But in order to get in that healing chain, then we have to start the conversation around. That's why I like to start the word hydration. I wish I didn't have to say it so much in my life, Dr. Cowan. But it's a great place to start, because then people are like, yeah, I know I'm like not as juicy as I can be. And I'd really love to hear you say a little bit more about the spirituality and science, and how you've walked that path in your own, because you are returning to the science, and you're helping us to return to the science, and you're speaking in a voice that allows us to look at the cell in a new way, to look at ATP in a new way, to understand electrical charge. This is fantastic to just bring into the physician's concept that, wait, we all know the cell runs on voltage. Why are we not really looking at that as foundational to how we're going to adjust our health for this modern life?
Right. I mean, the question of spirituality, I usually sort of deflect that because what I focus on is that, well, as I said, this question of, are we only material entities, which I think I said my piece on that, that's just nonsense. Therefore, everything else there must be spiritual. That's sort of the definition. Mm-hmm. Either material or spiritual. Now, of course, Steiner broke that down into different bodies and different hierarchies, and I don't know about that firsthand. I have a little bit, but I tend to stay with step one in this process was, since it's very clear that we're not fundamentally material beings, not to say we don't have a material body, which we do, but, or another way to say it is, if you took the stuff that makes up a carrot and put it next to the stuff that makes up a beet, does anybody think the difference in those two organisms is the difference in the stuff? Like the beet has 1,000 sulfurs and the carrot has 1,003. So the difference between a carrot and the beet is the number of sulfurs. Now, I would admit it's interesting, but what I would say is this spiritual body or this water body or this form body, one of them is looking for a little bit more sulfur than the other one. And so that's how life works, is these spiritual bodies, which I get into, more detail, which is this form water body. That's the most basic one. Actually, the way it works is it collects the substance that it wants, creates a living being out of that, and that's what we call a carrot, and that's even the basis for our life. Implicit in that is that when this spiritual force, this non-material force, it moves on and then discards or separates from the material stuff, and then that becomes dust again. It gets subject to entropy and gravity, and then it moves on. That makes a whole different thing. So that spiritual force, or that non-material, body that we're talking about, is not subject to the same laws that the physical stuff is. The reason this gets so important is, one can almost demonstrate that it's basically immortal. It doesn't get degraded like the physical stuff, which, by the way, is what all traditional people and indigenous people thought, or anybody with any sense, I would say.
Or Einstein.
Yeah, or a lot of modern physicists, they say consciousness is first, or that's a spiritual force.
Right.
The reason this is so important is there's a huge push now, because we only believe, we being the modern dominant culture, that only physical reality exists. Therefore, I should try to download myself onto a immortal physical structure, because it's the physical structure that they want to be immortal. The other word for that is artificial intelligence. The reason they're doing that is because they want to be immortal. The I that they're hoping will be immortal is their physical body. That's a terrible mistake and trap. The reality is they're already immortal.
Yes.
They just don't realize it. They connect themselves with this one part, which is actually the least interesting, least unique part. It's just sulfur and hydrogen.
Again, we are speaking as an anthropologist, we are the only culture that has ever thought.
Yes.
We're the only culture that hasn't included immortality in our understanding of what life is, what the life force is, how life forms, where it returns to after dust, how
right.
about this. It's extraordinary to me that there's such a vast history of human experience, and how did we land here?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a certain evolutionary path, I guess, but the thing that's so interesting is people are so determined to do this that they're basically willing to destroy the planet in order to accomplish it. And in a sense, I don't blame them, because if that's all there is,
right,
then that's all there is. Yeah. And you might as well try to figure out how to make it work.
Right. The material isn't that important all of a sudden, or the reverence we need for the material isn't that important. When part of our work here at the Hydration Foundation is we use this word hydration as the portal to talk about things. Most people think we're going to just start talking about hydrating people. But actually our mission here is to hydrate people, plants, animals, and soils. Because
the earth.
Yeah, the earth is the ultimate place that requires hydration, and that's where we're seeing dehydration happen at the most prominent and quickest place.
Right.
So we're very concerned about research on hydration and soil motility, for example, with the microbes in the soils need gel hydration in order to re-engage their own diversity. And I know you're very interested in agriculture and the process of how things grow, and that you also have started a family business developing these beautiful, well-grown plants, fruits and vegetables, mostly vegetables, that are then allowed to go through their entire gel state, and then you powder them, right? And in a sense, dehydrate them, but then offer that for rehydration. Tell me a little, I'm very interested in that. And I bet our listeners are too, because getting to high quality modern foods, high foods in a modern environment is a huge issue. It is a difficult issue. And I have some interesting answers there.
I don't know. I mean that business was basically to try to help people diversify their plant intake. Plants are essentially the beings of this hydration, if you want to say that. They're, again, a plant is water, form body plus substance. And so that creates unique substances that we call plants. So they each have their own variation of a theme. And one of my principles of medicine is that in order to be healthy, you should get as many of those different variations as possible. Traditional people, some have made 110 different plants per year and 20 per day, and Americans eat 20 per year and 1 or 2 per day, and that includes ketchup and French fries and things like that. So that was the point of that, to grow them as best we can using, beyond organic techniques and biodynamic and wild, and to make them accessible to people to diversify their diet. It didn't have so much to do with hydration or gels, except that a plant is by definition it's a water body.
Mm-hmm. That's simple.
That's
simple. A lot
simple.
of plants gets you a lot of good hydration.
Right.
Really simple. Well, is there anything else you would like to say, Dr. Cowan? What are you reading? How are you researching this next book? Just talk to us a little bit about your next stage.
So the final of the 3 is, I don't know the exact title, but something about cancer and the new biology of water, which goes through this whole theory of how essentially the cancer process is a breakdown of the gel phase, and how when you look at everything from the Gerson diet to the Rife machine to structured water throughout history and Lourdes, you see this whole connection between water and cancer as a healing agent, etc. So that's that. And that's coming soon. And then we'll see. I was asked to write something on children and how to raise healthy children in a toxic world, which I've sort of written, and we'll see what happens with that.
Well, all right then. Give us like 3 things we can do to raise ourselves and our children in a toxic world.
Sunlight, earth, and good food. And keep them away from electronic devices until they're 92 years old.
Bless you. May you flourish. We appreciate your time with us.
Thank you.
Our work here at the Hydration Foundation is to spread new forms of hydration, better hydration in a very challenged environment. We're trying to help physicians literally come to our website and learn about hydration, learn about the things you're speaking about, and even just send their patients to us because they don't have time to have these extraordinary important conversations.
Right.
And, there's physicians we want to support them as much as possible. So thanks for helping us.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.